Come one and come all. Welcome to No Infringement Intended, an intellectual property podcast of our law firm, Troutman Pepper Locke, hosted by the so-called bad boys of intellectual property, Rusty Close and Austin Padgett. As always, I'll ask that you leave 5 stars for us. Make sure you're subscribed. Do all the things on your platform. That really helps us share the show with other people, build our community, and make one more step towards world domination. Well, let's go back and start with our mailbag again and see what we find in here. Well, first one in is Morgan writes in and asks, will you do a true crime episode? I'm at a loss, Rusty. What are you thinking?
I'm trying to think how we tie together true crime and our true passion, intellectual property. And one thing that I thought of is, could we do an episode about whether the Zodiac Killer could copyright his cipher? Would that be something we could work with?
Oh, I love it. There are those series of cases about whether you can profit from your crime.
Like if you write a book about it.
Yeah, I won't start mentioning names. So, Morgan, we'll start working on it. I can't promise it'll be in the next few episodes, but we will start thinking that direction, as I know that's a hot place to go. And maybe we can get our numbers up in a certain demo for that.
No bad ideas in a brainstorm.
That's right. Our next letter comes in from Zachary, writes in and he asks, will you guys have a holiday episode this year? You didn't have one last year. That's an astute observation, Zach, and if I can call you Zach instead of Zachary. But I think you're right that now we are in season 2. It's time for a holiday episode, Rusty. And why don't we go a little meta on this, and we'll talk a little bit about holiday episodes themselves. So we've talked about our favorite television shows through the years between ourselves, many of which overlap, but I don't think we've ever gone down this rabbit hole. What do you make of holiday episodes generally?
So you've got kind of like the two versions. You've got the sort of holiday specialty show, and that kind of brings to mind the legendary Star Wars holiday episode.
Oh, yes.
Legendary, maybe not in the best way. And then you've also got the typical drama or comedy that does a holiday episode as part of their ongoing series. I definitely have always been a big fan of The Office. They did some good holiday episodes. One of my favorites, I think, was the first holiday episode they did, and it's the Yankee swap. And Michael Scott wants to have booze at the party. He goes to the liquor store and he asks the clerk, he says, all right, you're the expert. Is this enough to get 20 people wasted? Or he says plastered, I think. And the clerk looks at him and says, 15 bottles of vodka. That should do it.
That should do it.
And this just the deadpan of that should do it always kills me.
Oh, I love it. Yeah. One weird thing when I revisit holiday episodes is one of my favorite shows wasn't streaming or even available on DVD or anything like that for a long time. And so I actually have a huge collection of VHS tapes that I recorded from television many, many years ago. I don't remember when we got cable television because we weren't early adopters. Did your family have cable early on, Rusty?
Yes, of course.
Okay. Early adopters.
Yeah, baby.
Okay. Yeah, I'm sure my mother would tell me differently. I feel like it was probably late middle school, maybe early high school when we got cable. It might have been earlier than that.
So in this up and through early high school, are you watching just over an antenna, classic, what you could pick up through the airwaves?
Yeah, your classic broadcast.
Unbelievable. And so were you videotaping shows off of that signal?
Correct.
Wow.
Yeah, so that's what I've got.
No wonder you were so good at piano, right? And learning to play instruments. And I wasn't, because I was busy watching cable TV and you didn't have that luxury.
Yeah, we had like basically 3 channels. Any like repute and ability to get them in like really good order. There was, I think we had 3, 5, 10, and 44 were the 4 main ones. And then there were a few others that I was never really sure what they were. They never really made sense and they didn't really, like the fidelity wasn't all that great. They were pretty fuzzy.
Wasn't what you were looking for.
Yeah, for sure.
All right. So you have this collection of VHS tapes.
I do.
That you painstakingly recorded.
And I would tell you it's my favorite show of all time. You have any guesses?
I'm trying to think of like when the era would have been that you would have been recording these. And X-Files is the thing that came to mind.
Oh, that's a good guess. That's a really good guess. That would be, I'm almost positive we had cable at least towards the end of the X-Files run.
Okay.
But none of that matters. And certainly my best friend Gary and I would watch X-Files. I think that was a Sunday night show. And we would talk about it on Monday, typically.
You and Gary with your water cooler talk?
Absolutely. There in the high school, nerds, a delight for sure. Now, this is the Wonder Years.
Okay. All right. Yeah.
If you recall that show. Still probably my favorite show of all time. And I have the originals on VHS with the commercials and everything sitting around. And the reason that it had this issue is that it has so much music.
Yep.
And so the licensing was really tough, which isn't what we're going to talk about today, but it has one of my favorite, because it's my favorite show, probably my favorite holiday episode as well in season 2, when the family gets the color television. And it's so poignant, and that show has everything in it.
Yeah, that's a good one. You being a child of the 50s and 60s, a true baby boomer at heart, I could see how you would relate so closely to it.
That's exactly right. I'm watching it right now with my kids, and it's crazy how I've always lined up with Kevin, the child character, and now I'm more kind of with the dad of just like, yeah, we shouldn't spend money on this new car. We should. Everybody needs to work hard, and all these sorts of things. So.
Are you making the kids watch the VHS copies, or are you streaming these?
They are streaming now.
Okay.
I guess they figured out the licensing rights and everything.
Yeah.
So, although I think there are some music replacements here and there.
There are shows that have done that, like where they just couldn't get the rights and they had to swap out a song. Yeah.
Yeah. Famously, I think Dawson's Creek, when you stream it, it does not have the original theme song tied to it. So
I think that's right. Yeah.
There you go. So before we go too far, I wanted to find some terms. As I mentioned a few episodes ago, we actually have numerous members of the younger generations listening. And I like to think that classroom teachers are out there assigning our podcast for required listening, and that students are putting us on double speed just to get through it.
Yeah. And part of our Payola campaign is paying off in terms of making the teachers assign this to their kids. So that's working pretty well.
That's right. Yeah, just wait till we start pushing that merch, and I guess 6, 7 out there for all the kids, whatever that means.
Absolutely.
Anyway, their generation has been gracious enough to let us at least know kind of their trending language and these types of things. But when I talk about VHS, that stands for Video Home System, and it really means the cassette tape that we would put into VCRs, and that stands for a video cassette recorder. And that machine allowed us to play movies from a cassette. But you could also put in this blank cassette in it, and you could record television programming straight off of the TV. But it was in real life, so you'd have to be there at the exact same time that you need to press record or whatever. So the challenge, of course, in recording your shows on VHS is that it's deeply analog in process. Some VCRs would have the scheduling for you so that you can leave the tape in, and it would automatically record your television on a designated channel and time, assuming that you had room left on the cassette tape. I think ours were always about 90 minutes long. But I don't think our VCR had scheduling. I don't know if you remember what your setup was at your house, Rusty.
We had scheduling. You had to know what you were doing. It wasn't like an intuitive interface or anything like that. You had to work your way through, but you could set date, time. And I don't know that you were setting channel. Maybe you just had to have it. You had to have the TV on that channel when you were setting it to record, and hope that nobody changed it in the interim.
Gotcha. Yeah. So I think ours, it was this huge silver box. And it weighed an absolute ton. And it was about as wide and had the depth of the television itself.
Right.
And so it's just a monstrosity. The reason I'm bringing this up is that we're going to talk about 3 cases today, but 2 are really laying the groundwork for a more recent case, at least within kind of the last decade or so. And so before we get too bogged down, our listeners are probably out there wondering, what are we talking about? Recording these shows, surely that triggers something. And so to quickly get that out of the way, we'll point them to the Supreme Court's Betamax case from 1984. And I often joke around that I view this case as the court's most important 5-4 decision.
We know you're a hit at all dinner parties, and I'm sure this just goes right along with that.
I keep sharing all my jokes in here, so I've got to get some new material.
You have to update your material. Yeah.
Absolutely. So here's the quote from the case. The question is thus whether the Betamax is capable of commercially significant non-infringing uses. And the Betamax is it's a VCR. You can put a tape in and record it. So, and then it goes on and describe and says, well, there are private, non-commercial, time-shifting in the home uses. And when one considers the nature of a televised copyrighted audiovisual work, And that time shifting merely enables a viewer to see the work which he had been invited to witness in its entirety free of charge. The fact that the entire work is reproduced does not have its ordinary effect of militating against a finding of fair use. So it's a fair use finding.
Sure.
That when I recorded the entire series of every episode of its entirety of the Wonder Years, that I was time shifting it to watch it 40 years later.
Many years down the road. Yeah.
Here we are. Though I say that, we don't have a functioning VCR right now, so all these tapes are just relics.
And I wonder how easy it is to find one. It's one of those things where surely I can get a VCR, and you probably start looking around and it's $50 minimum or something like that just to find one.
Dude,
you could play.
They are much more expensive.
Are they really?
Than that. Yeah, the market for a working VCR is crazy if you go online. I did this total side note, that movie Space Camp. I don't know if you remember.
Yeah, of course.
I've got that on VHS as well. And I could not find it anywhere streaming or whatever. And I wanted to show the kids. So I was like, well, I guess we should get a VCR. And I assumed $25, $50, not bad. I'll bite the bullet. And then we've got a VCR and we can really, really get into the depths of my collection here. No, man, we're talking $600 at that time.
No way.
Yes. For a used VCR. And I mean, there are, I think, only a handful of companies even still making them new.
Sure.
And they are like professional level VCRs, or at least they tout to be.
Of course.
This was a few years ago as I was looking into it. Maybe the market's calmed down a little bit.
The market's cooled. This is during COVID, right? When everyone's at home.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe actually, I think it was during COVID now that I think about it. Maybe it's like vinyl, where there was at one point, there were only a few machines in the US that could press vinyl anymore. And now they're all over the place. You and I could probably find one ourselves and start our own. So
my beloved wife, brilliant, just as smart as she can be. And she's an English major in college, and she then went on to law school, and she took one of those tests, one of those aptitude tests in high school to kind of project out careers you might want to consider. Mm-hmm. And the top career for her was VCR repairman. And so we've often joked that it's lucky she didn't go into that field, because we'd be a little bit obsolete by now.
What a calling.
Yeah. I mean,
that's so specific.
It's so specific. It really is something you have to be called to do, I think,
I don't even remember. I'm sure we had a problem. I didn't even know that was a option.
Well, I mean, when we were in high school 30 years ago, it was probably looked like a pretty promising gig. I think we're going to get in today why that ended up not being the case.
Yeah, exactly. I'll have to think more about this. I don't remember VCRs being particularly expensive, particularly towards the end.
Yeah, right. That's why I thought they got to be pretty cheap at this point. They're just disposable goods almost.
Right. Yeah. But I guess a lot of them didn't end up working. And now she could really make a killing off of that. Right. The time is now.
Name your price.
Right. So let's get past VCRs, and we go a few more years down the road, and we have this technology called the DVR, which is a huge leap in technology at the time. Rusty, tell us about DVR and how it changed your life entirely.
Well, so I finished going to college in 2000 and started working. And I remember that Christmas, I was living at home with my parents, and I bought for them for Christmas, wink, wink, for them, a TiVo. And what an unbelievable piece of technology in the early 2000s. So, you go from having to set this VCR, figure out when this is going to be on, can I program it for the right time, and hope that nobody changes the channel, to this box that you plug in. It's got its own intuitive interface. You can set it, tape this show whenever it comes on, anytime it comes on. There was limited storage because of storing it on the device. But other than that, it was such a tremendous leap forward. It's almost like it skipped 8 iterations of technology in the jump forward from the VCR.
Yeah, everyone was waiting for this thing. I think it wasn't that difficult to imagine that there had to be a better way by about 1999 when these things launched. And the DVR, I should mention, stands for Digital Video Recorder. It's just a hard drive that sits on your TV and records TV. So that's perfect. That takes us to the first case that I wanted to talk about, which is often called the Cablevision case. And in this case, you have Cablevision, which is a company that no longer exists. But when it did, it provided cable television to customers. And so maybe I'll back up and briefly explain what cable television is as well, since, we're many years down the road for some people of when some homes don't even have a hole punched in the wall right now. So before streaming took over, television used to come in 2 primary forms. The old way is through the air. So that's the kind we had early on growing up. Television program was broadcast on radio frequencies, and televisions would, quote, tune in to that channel to get the program. The second way is what I view as the newer way, though cable TV actually started in the 1940s and 50s. And that's where a provider would come to your house, put a small hole in the wall from the outside, and run a cable up to your television. And that cable would distribute whatever channel packages that you happen to order. I think typically it's kind of like, satellite radio. They'll give you all the channels early on and get you a little hooked. And then after 3 months or so, you got to start paying for the package that you want. You remember how many channels you had, Rusty, growing up?
So I think that at that time, especially like early 80s, which is when I think about the time I remember us having a cable box, I also think it was pretty regional. So if you grew up in a different part of the country, what you may remember as your cable box is likely to be entirely different from the type of cable box I had. Not that you were getting different channels or anything like that, but it was a localized thing. It hadn't all been consolidated yet. But what I remember is a box that had somewhere in the neighborhood of 15 buttons going horizontally across the box. And then there was a switch that had 3 positions. And it's kind of like we've talked about in some of our guitar cases. But so that would have given you about 45 channels, right? So 15 times 3.
Mm-hmm.
So it was somewhere in that neighborhood. And that's when you start getting TBS and USA Network. And if you paid the extra dough, Showtime, HBO, Cinemax, and the movie channel, I think those were the paid channels for the most part. But then you also, it was the first time you had those, what we think of as cable channels, in addition to your networks, your local ABC and NBC affiliates.
Yeah, and so I can hear the shouts from Creekland Middle School right down the road, where our friends in 6th through 8th grade, shout out to the Grizzlies, are thinking, Austin, Rusty, if you guys have cable, did you still have to use the over-the-air method to get those basic channels? And that's going to become an important point later. Your cable provider had a deal where they paid the networks to retransmit and redistribute those basic channels through the cable, so you would get everything through your cable setup, and you didn't have to have the rabbit ear antennas shooting out as well and switch back and forth. So back to Cablevision, that company was one of many in the United States who would come to their customers' homes, run a cable to the television, and around 2006, Cablevision starts to offer a platform called the Remote Storage Digital Video Recorder. That is the RS DVR. And so rather than have a hard drive box in your living room sitting on top of your TV or on the table underneath, your recordings would take place on Cablevision's servers at their facility. We would now call that a cloud, but that language didn't exist then. And you would still need to record your shows, and you would play them back the same way, but the recording would live outside of your home on a server through your provider. So important here is that a copy of each show was a unique copy on Cablevision's servers. So if you and I both record the newest episode of Lost in the early 2000s, that server had separate recordings for each of us. So when I choose to come back and watch my copy, it was my copy, and yours would be yours. And yours might actually be a little different because of local advertising, or perhaps down here you would get storm warnings.
Sure.
A lot. Some of the weatherman would break in right in the middle of the important show. That was always a bummer.
I think people now are familiar with on demand. You go to your interface, you say, hey, I want to watch this episode of Lost. The distinction here is this was actually a recording of the over-air broadcast. And I think you can think of it as somewhere on external servers. There's the Austin mailbox, there's the Rusty mailbox, there's Big Kev's mailbox, and our versions are stored locally. The versions that were broadcast in our areas, that's what we're going to be able to access.
That's right. Yeah, I debated whether to include this, but you should also think about some of these services provided little tools like skip ahead.
Sure. So did TiVo.
Yes. And so, you could skip commercials pretty easily. And in some instances, I believe there were kind of automatic replays where it would just kind of automatically jump commercials. So you start thinking about the economics of this and why, this might matter to one party or another.
Sure.
Those dollars start to add up. So a group of television program networks sue Cablevision, and they argue that it basically boils down to three things. I'll kind of tell you what they are and then the answer for each of them so that we're moving through this case pretty quickly because this is still a setup case, even as interesting as it is. So the first argument is that the technology enabled an unauthorized copy of the television program to be made. That is, the technology allowed Cablevision's customers to make an unauthorized copy of television programming. And where the court, and when I say court here, I'm talking about the appellate court decision, where that court comes down is that it says that the user is selecting the items to record, much like Betamax, me and my VCR making the VCR is a tool for me. Same thing for, the remote DVR, that I'm using this as a tool. I'm the one that's, although it's enabling me to do so, I'm the one making the decision to record things as the user. And that gets you back into Betamax because what I'm doing is I'm time shifting my watching. And that's apparently a fair use under Betamax. So says the Supreme Court in a divided opinion. The technology, this is the second argument, it included a buffer where about a second of the program was held in this buffer to facilitate the process of the recording and some of the other tools that are going on underneath of the technology for this remote DVR. Where the appellate court comes out on this is that the secondish buffer is not a real fixation because it's not anything more than, it's transitory in duration. It's just mere passing. It's essentially de minimis. That 1 second, even if because of the way the program goes, you've actually strung together 1 second recordings each second at a time, basically. It's just not enough to create a fixation of the copy because it is buffered and it's, removed from the system relatively quickly. The third argument is that the actual replay of the recording, so when it's delivered from that server back to your TV, Rusty, is an unauthorized public performance. So if you go back several episodes, we talk about the bundle of rights. We've talked about this in several episodes along the way. But as a copyright owner, you have the Section 106 bundle of rights. And those are the rights that you actually can assert against someone. It's you get to be the one to handle public distribution, public performances, the copying, the making of derivative works, all those sorts of things. And so they're saying this is a violation of the public performance right. And so where the court comes down on this is that, no, this is just time shifting. This is a one-to-one thing. I have my recording and you have your recording. They're different recordings in the system, and those are being delivered up to us and, on a one-to-one basis, not in a public performance way. It's not like they had one recording of that lost episode and we all tapped into it separately. That might look a little different, but here we got the one-to-one. So that takes us through the Cablevision case, and that starts to become a roadmap for further disruption in the television space along the way. And so the case I really wanted to talk about today was this case called Aereo, and it's our third and last case for the day. So Rusty, I'm going to describe what this company does, and then you and I can try to work out the legal principles at issue, and then we'll see where the court comes down on it. So Aereo's promise is to provide the ability to watch this live broadcast TV. So think of young Austin with the 4 channels, over the air, rabbit ear antennas. This is what we're grabbing out of the air. It's not cable television, but they want to give you that on any device without cable, without a box, and without a hassle, except for about $8 to $12 a month.
When does this technology hit the market?
This would be, let's say 2010-ish. I don't have the exact date, but we're in the teens at this point.
Yeah, so I'm just trying to think about what we were using. I think at that point we still had cable. We hadn't transitioned to streaming by any stretch at that point. And even with cable, though, you couldn't just pull up cable on any device. You were tied to a box.
Mm-hmm.
I do think Sling TV existed at that time.
Sling did, yep.
And then that would allow you to take, okay, well, my cable box is in my living room, but I'm traveling. I can log into my Sling on my laptop and watch what I could be watching in my living room. And it sounds like this was a version of that, except for over the airwaves TV.
Correct.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. So Aereo goes out and they build antenna farms. And so these farms contained thousands of coin-sized antennae, each of which is...
Good use there.
I appreciate that. I've been kind of like practicing that the past couple of days once I decided this case was the one we were going to talk about. So each of those is individually assigned to a subscriber when they are logged onto the system. So you go, when you log into your Aereo account, you get tied to one of these, basically your individual antenna that you can tune in as you need to. I don't recall. I think once you log out, it becomes free.
Sure.
I don't think you use the same one every time, but you have one at the time you're logging in. And so, Rusty, you click to watch Wheel of Fortune in the afternoon. You're assigned that antenna, and it tunes into the channel over the air frequency. It then digitizes the signal, and that's important for the analysis here. And that signal is then streamed directly to you, either live or through your cloud-based recording. They do allow for that in the system as well. So what are your thoughts on what this sounds like?
I mean, it sounds like the Cablevision case where it's your recording.
Mm-hmm.
Again, it's not on demand. It's the one that was, if it's the live stream, it's dedicated to you. And if it's a recording, it is, it's your recording, assuming that we're understanding all this correctly, but it's your recording that it's going and getting and making available to you. So to me, I mean, it's not exactly the same, but the principles are the same as the Cablevision case.
And that's important because that was the exact plan that Aereo had, was they looked at the Cablevision case and mapped out their plan based on the reasoning in that case.
If we take the principles that were allowed there,
yes,
we could make it work in this business.
Correct. And the issue that's going to haunt them here is that Cablevision was not a Supreme Court decision. So it's not the ultimate law of the land, so to speak. It's a federal appellate court opinion, which is important to have. And usually that's where your case stops. The Supreme Court only hears so many cases per year. And so lo and behold, Aereo is one of the cases that make it up to the Supreme Court.
So Betamax went to the Supreme Court.
Mm-hmm.
Cablevision did not.
Correct.
But this one is going to go to the Supreme Court.
It's going, yeah. So, and here's what the court decides. And this is a Breyer opinion. It's 6-3. So another, divided court, not 5-4, but, pretty close here. And they decide that Aereo is functioning like a cable company because it's providing the public a way to watch television programs over the internet. And cable companies are public performances, and that's the reason they need to pay for the retransmission package for these network shows. And so even though Aereo has a unique copy and transmission, the service is providing the same program to many unrelated people, and that equals a public performance. And they find that the technological trickery seems what they're trying to convey it as, doesn't change the fundamental nature of the service provided. And so the test that seems to come out of the case from the majority opinion is that, this looks like cable, and so we're going to adjudicate it like it's a cable company.
So I think we need to draw some distinctions here. So I think what Aereo, if you think about what their business model was, their thinking is, look, this stuff is just out there in the air, and anybody can put an antenna on their house and watch this stuff. And they don't owe any money to a cable company. They don't have to pay any sort of retransmission package or anything like that. It's just all out there. And if you harness it, you can bring it into your house.
Mm-hmm.
And they thought, we'll do that on a larger scale, right? We'll invest in these farms with all the antennae, and we'll set up the infrastructure so people can set up accounts, reserve an antenna, and then we will pull the stuff out of the air and then we'll send it to them. But we're doing it on an individual basis. And so we're not a cable company that has everything available all at once to make it available to everyone else all at once. We're doing this on an individualized basis. So we're just getting the stuff that's freely out there in the air and making it available to people in a way that no one's done before. And I think what you're saying is the court said, no, you're less like Cablevision. You're more like a cable company.
Right. because I think what it probably comes down to is that, they digitize the signal.
Right.
And that looks like a cable signal, or at least more like it.
It stops being the thing that you grab out of the air.
Right.
You grabbed it out of the air, but then you transformed it. And that made you more like a cable company at that point.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so that's, and it's a public performance case. So the question is this a public performance?
Right.
And so where Cablevision said, no, it's a 1-to-1, like you go and you had your own recording and you dig it out of there. The Supreme Court comes back and says, no, that's in essence a public performance. That, the television show is broadcast from 5:30 to 6 o'clock. Even though you had your own individual recording of it, it's the same show that you're tapping into as the hundreds of other people that are watching it through the same service.
Right.
That creates a public performance.
I mean, honestly, it seems like a little bit of tortured logic to me, without really digging in. It feels a lot more like they were arguing. It's 1-to-1. Look, we're pulling it out of the air. We're making it on this person's antenna and finding a way to make it available to that person. And if someone else wants to watch the same one, that's coming through their antenna and going to them directly. We're not bringing them all in at once and then sending them out. We're not bringing them into a single place and then sending them out to multiple places. We're bringing it in out of the air in one space and sending it directly out to one person.
Yeah.
That feels to me more like Cablevision.
Right. And so if you want a really great read, Scalia dissents here, one of our previous justices of the Supreme Court, who was, if you go to law school, you're going to read a number of Scalia cases in con law, either his opinions that he wrote or some of his dissents. Always known as a colorful writer, one of the great writers on the court. And this is, particularly in the copyright context, it's just a great read.
Yeah.
So he expresses some frustration, and you can read into that what you want, that the majority has twisted copyright law to reach a fair sounding outcome, but at the expense of, legal clarity and technological innovation. So the underlying issue is the question of how the user's conduct is the chief act in engaging the service for Scalia. And so that's, Aereo is providing technology, again, similar to Cablevision, for use at the direction of the user. And so this looks like cable, feels like cable, looks like a duck type of rationale is not satisfying for Scalia because it has no legal foundation. Instead, it's policy intuition. And so that's where particularly Scalia as an originalist, and he described himself one time as a faint-hearted originalist, which is kind of Scalia-esque type of language. He's, like I said, he's very colorful in his prose. That already will upset his apple cart, because once you start acting more like Congress and less like a court in his view, that's a fundamental issue for him, even outside of the Copyright Act and in any sort of kind of structural argument for him. So it's a good opinion if you want to get to know kind of some of Scalia's thoughts, but keep it within the IP process, because there aren't a ton of IP cases at the Supreme Court.
Right.
So interestingly, even though he's chastising the court for seemingly engaging in lawmaking, he goes ahead and comes up with his own test. And it basically is kind of this three-parter, did the defendant select the content? Did the defendant initiate the transmission? And if not, then the system is just responding to user commands. And so the user is the performer and not the system. And you can see where this can invite its own trouble as well. We won't dive too deeply into this, but that's, it's a really great dissent, super well written. I commend it to all of our readers if they want to. You can't read that case without reading the dissent, which isn't necessarily true of a lot of cases.
I mean, it is interesting, and I feel like I should go and read it now, but I think it's important. Did the defendant select the content, and did the defendant initiate the transmission? The defendant is Aereo. The other way of saying it is, did the user select the content, and did the user initiate it?
Right.
And if so, this is an Aereo being a cable company, right? I mean, this is different than that.
I think the issue with that test, at least for me, in trying to think about how clear can we make, if we're truly going to announce a bright line test, well, Aereo did make some level of decision because it said, okay, we're going to provide this universe of content. We selected the universe of content.
We're telling you what's available for you to pick from.
Right.
Yeah.
But that goes to kind of, these secondary types of liability typically, is it contributory infringement and those types of issues that the court doesn't get into with any meaningful, explanation here. So the issue before the court was one of direct infringement and, through the public performance right. So it's a more limited opinion in that way, but it's a fascinating case because you had a company that looked at a prior case and the case law from Betamax all the way to Cablevision. And there were other cases along the way that helped build that chain, but they saw the reasoning in those cases and built their business model around it, trying to find some angle to disrupt an industry and make their entrance. And it was relatively quickly shut down through kind of new type of policy view that hey, you look like a cable company. And they're like, well, if I'm them, I'm saying, yeah, but we set this up in a specific way to try to make sure that we're adhering to copyright principles. And so this looks like test is a very dissatisfying. I remember when this case came down and reading it and thinking this is one that I would have loved to be back in law school when it came out so that we could, spend 30 minutes or so on it in copyright class, just batting it back and forth.
Yeah, now you just get to do that at a coffee shop or, at a dinner party.
Yeah, that's the reason I started this podcast was to get to this single episode. Well, now's the time in the show when we dream up our worst case scenarios. So when this Aereo's decision comes down, a lot of attorneys start writing, their updates to their clients about how this is going to crush innovation because of this looks like a cable company analysis. And I don't know that it necessarily had that impact, but it still might, particularly with AI. And so I start thinking about if I use an AI tool to search for news, it starts to look more like a publisher and less like a search engine tool, which, for those two different types of purposes, copyright law is built differently. The search tools have a lot more leeway because of fair use principles and similar types of items that allow them to make copies or thumbnails and all these types of things that cases have come along the way with, because that's what they need to function. And the service they're providing isn't one of a publishing company. Now, all of a sudden, we've got this looks like test, and we have AI technology, which not only takes search engines to the next level, but might start blending in. And you could think of other examples where a looks like test could start to be applied.
Well, and, I think any of us, I don't know if you go to Yahoo every day or something like that, but I imagine that, your Yahoo feed and my Yahoo feed are different because they're basing it on what they've shown us before and what we've shown interest in before. And so it already is doing some of that, publishing in some ways. I mean, you could argue that it's already doing that. I mean, it's using AI maybe in a more rudimentary form, but you could certainly think of a scenario where you tell ChatGPT, hey, every morning I want you to gather for me, articles on this subject, and this subject from these resources, just so you have your daily, diet of digestible news bits that's interesting to you and informs you. It does that every day. It scrapes the stuff. It takes a closer look at what you read out of that stuff and fine tunes it. But yeah, you could see how that's publishing and less about, a search engine.
Yeah. Well, I think that covers a lot of territory. We've taken up a lot of our listeners' time, which I hope was well spent.
Always.
Any last points?
No, I think this is interesting. I feel like now I'm going to have to go read a Supreme Court dissent, but other than giving me that homework, I think we're good.
Yeah, and it's just great to know that the kids now know what VCR, VHS, all that stuff means too. So thanks for listening, everyone. Be sure to like and subscribe, and if you would, give us that 5-star rating to help everyone know what we're up to over here. And of course, no infringement intended.
Copyright Troutman Pepperlock, LLP. These recorded materials are designed for educational purposes only. This podcast is not legal advice and does not create an attorney-client relationship. The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of the individual participants. Troutman does not make any representations or warranties, expressed or implied, regarding the contents of this podcast. Information on previous case results does not guarantee a similar future result. Users of this podcast may save and use the podcast only for personal or other non-commercial educational purposes. No other use, including without limitation, reproduction, retransmission, or editing of this podcast may be made without the prior written permission of Troutman Pepper Locke. If you have any questions, please contact us at troutman.com.